There's only one thing you can plan on, and we've got miles of experience on today's Carolina People. Stay tuned. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at 1550 Oak Street, the Myrtle Beach branch of South Carolina Bank and Trust. We're focused on funeral planning, and we're visiting with a sales rep of Pierce Companies and a former owner-operator of a funeral home. Good morning,
Correct.
Charles.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for getting in early on a Monday morning. Are you originally from the area, Charles?
From Darlington originally, not too far away.
Right up in our viewing area,
Yeah,
right on the
that's correct.
northern edge of our viewing area.
PD, that's right.
You still have family in Darlington?
I do. I have a sister and her family that still lives there in Darlington.
Mm-hmm.
She laughed because she moved to Sumter, and when she came back to Darlington, we all left and moved to the beach.
Now she's wanting to get on down, I'm sure.
She does like it down here as well, that's right.
That's your only sister?
I have another sister that lives here at the beach. She actually lives in Conway.
Oh, great.
She's a church organist at St. Paul's Episcopal in Conway.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Son of a gun.
And very active. Also an accompanist at Coastal Carolina University.
Is that right?
So she got all the talent in the family.
And you live in Conway as well?
That's correct.
Good.
Yeah, in Conway. I was in Carolina Forest, moved to Conway about a year and a half ago.
Well, it's normally the other way around. What prompted that move?
We bought a house down near the river in Conway, and I have two sons that are both outdoorsmen, enjoy the river, as do I. I miss the water when we lived in Carolina Forest.
Right.
Have to admit the traffic at the light at Carolina Forest did have a little to do with my decision.
Is that right? Yeah.
I travel a lot with my work, and so I was glad to move to Conway to kind of cut out that little stretch of 501. So
I mean, that's really an issue. I mean,
it really is.
Wow.
It really is.
What are they doing about that? Not that we're talking about funeral planning, but what are they doing about that?
Well, a lot I read. I've tracked in the paper, and we're doing a lot with the road improvements now. I think we were a little behind down here, but we're really catching up quickly with 22 and 31 and all the paving projects that we have going on now in Horry County. I think it's getting better. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what Hard Rock does.
I know exactly. That's going to impact, assumably. I was just reading a piece in last week's Herald about Coast RTA and their plans to have a real dedicated commitment to getting people in and out of Hard Rock Park.
I read that as well. It's going to be very interesting.
Right. What actually got you into the funeral industry, Charles?
That's a very interesting story. It sounds real odd to people that aren't in the industry and don't know a lot about it. But when I was very young, 14 years old, I attended church in Darlington, which happened to be next door to a funeral home.
Really?
And my sister was the organist there, and the manager of the funeral home attended church with our family.
Right.
And I think he somewhat jokingly told my mother one Sunday that I looked like a little funeral director. I've never been a little anything, but anyway, that next day she told me, she said, you need steady work, go talk to Mr. Buchanan. Dan Buchanan was the manager at the time, and I did, and he gave me a job at the funeral home, and I've been in it ever since.
And early on in your teens, I mean, what could you do in a funeral home?
Well, I started out painting a fence. That was where he put me to work, and finished painting the fence. And he said there was some painting that needed to be done on the garage. And like at any funeral home, things would come up. A car would need to be washed, or the grass would need to be mowed, or I would ride with Mr. Sammy on the grave truck to go help put up a tent, or help with a grave, or flowers on a funeral. And just time flew by. I got my driver's license and started helping with errands and other things around the funeral home.
Was that at all scary or anxious for you in your early to mid-teens about being around? I mean, you began to actually see bodies, I suppose.
Well, even only when I got a little older would they allow me into that part of the funeral
I understand,
home,
but I mean, knowing what the business was.
Never bothered me.
Sure. Really?
Never bothered me.
Huh.
Kind of odd.
Did anyone else in your family have? Obviously, you mentioned Mr. Buchanan who opened that door. Was anyone else in your family involved in the industry at all?
No, not at all, which
Really?
is also a little bit unusual. A lot of firms, especially in South Carolina, in your smaller rural areas like Darlington, a lot are family-owned and have been for years, and then you see generations of that same family go through the business, but my situation was a little different.
Sure.
My parents had nothing to do with the funeral home. That's just how it started, with Buchanan's influence.
That's fascinating. Of course, I saw that was Kistler funeral home. Had there was a Kistler family? Were they active in that?
They were. Started in 1922.
Is that right?
Mr. Harry Kistler started as a lot of funeral homes did, kind of as a cabinet maker and a casket maker, and then the funeral home evolved, as funeral homes did, into the public started demanding a place to gather, and that's where funeral homes came into being. So, but Mr. Harry started that business back in 22, and then his family continued it right on up.
That is fascinating. Well, of course, in this area, we've seen highlighting even a century-old here in Horry County, a century-old funeral home, Goldfinch.
Correct.
And its operation, I think Steve McMillan and his family have been involved in for more than 3 decades.
That's correct.
You've got other ones, I'm sure, up and down the Strand. Newer ones, Alan Lee and his folks up there, but up and down the Strand, I'm sure. Obviously, most of our viewers are in the PD, even up in the Darlington and Florence area. There's probably some real old establishments in the PD as well.
There are. You mentioned Steve. People kind of laughed at Steve. He was one of the first buildings on the bypass. In '78, building on the bypass was a big deal.
Right.
And look at it today.
Oh yeah, what an operation!
It's amazing.
Yes, it is. That's probably one of the few parcels on either side of the road that Burrs and Chapin doesn't have.
That's correct.
Yeah, which is a great location. You know, obviously getting into the industry. So you got in your early teens. What prompted you to keep going?
Just fell in love with the business. Fell in love with serving people. Continued to work there through high school. I did have one short time when I attended Winthrop College, but I still worked at the funeral home on the weekends.
Is that right?
And then a full-time position opened when I was home for Christmas, and I took it and I stayed in it, and then decided to attend mortuary school, which would enable me to get my license.
Right.
Which I did, and just have always had a love for serving people that way, and have just been in it ever since.
It really is all about people.
It really is. You know, so many people that find out what you do, they find out you're in some part of the funeral industry, they automatically start asking you questions about the death side of it. And that's certainly a big part of what we do. But dealing with the survivors and the extended family and the public, that's even a larger part of what we do. You deal with you deal with those survivors. A big part of the business is that.
Both leading up to, surely going after the actual ceremony, and for oftentimes many years afterwards.
Correct. Before, during, and after. And you deal with. I've also been associated with funeral homes that not only have you have the pre-planning side of a funeral home where people may come in advance and plan their funeral, and then you may help them when you actually conduct the actual funeral. And then I've dealt with a funeral home that had a cemetery before, so you also deal with them on the cemetery side of it, which of course is for years and forever. So you have a contact with that family and deal with that family for a long, long time.
I was fascinated studying a little bit about an upcoming funeral home in the area that are using an interior designer out of the Southern Pines area, and he works for an operator, Jamie Bowles, who actually takes lots of trips, and they go on trips with surviving families and folks that are tied in, come down to Myrtle Beach, go to the Carolina Opry, do things like that, travel to the Triangle, for instance, from the Sand Hills in North Carolina, to actually be together, and as you say, to really follow up in that surviving method.
You build relationships with people that last a long, long time. You deal with people that are obviously a very, very difficult time, and you do build those long-lasting relationships and friendships that last a long time. I know Jamie, and he's a great person, great funeral director.
Yeah. I saw it at one point after mortuary school that you ended up at a pretty large institution there in the Midlands.
I did. I lived in Columbia. Again, referring to Mr. Buchanan, he gave me advice to move to a larger metropolitan area, a larger funeral home that handled a larger volume, because you can just gain so much more experience in a short amount of time. And he joked with me and told me, he said, I taught you some of the basics in Darlington, but you need to go to a large firm to get your master's. And so I did that with the Dunbar family. At that time, they were still family owned. And enjoyed that time very much, and learned a lot of things that I would not, it would have taken me a lot longer to learn in a small community, because they literally do 10 or 12 times the business in a town like that than in Darlington, and so you just see a lot of different things, deal with a lot of different types of people,
And that spurred your interest to open your own place, I believe, or to get involved to actually pursue ownership. Excuse me, I saw you worked even back in a small community.
I did that. I moved back from Columbia back to a small area. I was in Marion, South Carolina, not too far from here.
Sure.
And was there for 10 years with Jerry Richardson at Richardson Funeral Home, and worked for him for 5 years, and then bought the business from him, kept it from 5 years, and then oddly enough sold it back to him.
So is that right?
I did.
Wow.
His son, Jerry, and his son, Jason, are running the business again now. I left there in '99 to move down to the beach area. So.
Oh, exciting. Well, I've been fascinated to see how Marion has been a launching pad for a number of folks to actually come down. I think I saw that Steve, or maybe Steve's brother, had ties to Marion, Alan Lee and others.
That's correct.
Ties to Marion, and surely setting up shop in Horry County and expanding their business very well.
Marion's a great community. I still have a lot of good friends there.
Oh, yeah.
Great place.
You know, as you think about it, obviously we opened up with highlighting Pierce Companies. What exactly is the Pierce Companies?
We are a funeral supply one of our divisions. We are a funeral supply company all over the United States. We have currently 26 representatives that distribute and sell our products throughout the U.S. And I travel North and South Carolina for the Pierce Companies, Pierce Chemicals. We are a company that has a full line of funeral supplies. We sell supplies to funeral homes that they need on a daily basis to operate their business, and that's what we do. And we are best known for our chemicals, our embalming fluid line.
I think you highlighted Pierce Companies also are involved in some mortuary schools.
We do. We have an education side as well. We own 3 mortuary colleges, including the one I attended in Atlanta, which is Gupton Jones College of Funeral Service.
Sure. So there's a broad knowledge, and much like yourself, would most of the sales reps with Pierce Chemicals have the experience that you have, having operated, even owned, and worked in the funeral homes?
All of them. Proudly, all of our reps are licensed funeral directors and/or embalmers, all
Really?
26. That's right.
That's tremendous.
And have a lot of experience.
That's fantastic, and that is surely something. But the parent company having the experience of being on the educational side to make sure that not only are there reps out on the street growing the company that have that experience, but also even folks that aren't yet working and operating funeral homes, they're helping be involved and to train them.
That's right, and we combine the two things as well. Twice a year, our reps go, and I am one of the reps that goes to the school in Atlanta, and we do product presentation seminars where we actually talk to the students as field reps about a lot of the products that we sell and that they will use on a daily basis in the funeral home. So the reps get involved, and it's a good way for us to meet those now students that will become employees in funeral home owners and operators in our territory.
Absolutely. Very important.
Yeah.
You mentioned embalming, that many of your folks, if not all of them, are funeral directors and or embalmers.
Correct.
And that's what exactly is the embalming process?
The embalming process is a part in the funeral home where the embalmer takes care of the dead human body, and it involves disinfection and sanitation and preservation so that the family can view the body and have the time and take the time to plan the service. We live in such a mobile society now, and I was just describing, I'm not far from here, but I don't still live in my hometown. So many people that we deal with in funeral homes now, their siblings and children literally live all over the country and the world. And it takes time to get all of those people in one place to have a funeral, and embalming allows you the time to do that for the family to get together. So you don't have to have the funeral today or tomorrow or the next day. When the body is embalmed, it can be preserved for a period of time so that the family can get together and still spend their time with their loved one and have a service at a later date.
That's wonderful. And Pierce Chemicals really comes into play in that.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
That's wonderful.
That's right.
How long does it take normally to plan a funeral, Charles? What all is involved in that, to segue off of the chemical side there? How long does it take to actually plan a funeral?
That's a good question, and one that's somewhat difficult to answer. I would relate that to one of your businesses. That's kind of like asking one of your best reporters, how long does it take to write an article? Well, Mr. Buchanan, when he taught me in school, joked about it. The correct answer to that question is as long as it takes. We have families from all different walks of life. You can make plans with a family for a funeral in as little as 15 to 30 minutes, you may be with a family for 3 hours.
Right.
Different people have different amounts of questions about different things. The death may have been tragic. You may need to ask and answer those questions in a short amount of time. Other people want you to talk with them and counsel with them again, and you may be with them for 2 or 3 hours. So I used to tell people, though, when sometimes you actually go to the place of death
Right.
to bring the person that died back to the funeral home, and a lot of times you will consult with the family then and set an appointment maybe for the next day for them to
Right.
come in.
Right.
And I would tell them to allow a couple of hours for that appointment.
Is that right? Good.
Yeah, so I would say a couple of hours you're going to need to make those plans.
Because they never know. The families don't know in advance some of the questions that they're going to eventually ask you. You don't know some of the answers the way you may give them or provide them based off of that family. As you said, if it's not a tragic death, what are some of the most? I mean, if it's just something, if it's old age, for instance, what are some of the most commonly asked questions that you've had to field as it relates during that time if they're trying to actually plan out the loss of a loved one?
There's still a lot of information that has to be compiled in any death, and a lot of times people don't understand that the funeral director is the one that compiles all the information that is eventually put on the death certificate for it to be filed as a permanent record, and all of those questions are handled during that appointment. The actual planning of the service, which involves the time, the place, the day, and it doesn't involve just us. We would have to contact ministers that are going to be involved,
Right.
musicians that are going to be involved, and a lot of times you can't assume people's schedule. A lot of times we would actually make the phone calls while the family was there,
Right.
to make sure that suited the minister's schedule, for example, and to make sure that the church wasn't being used for another function, that we
Right.
could use the
Wow.
church. Yeah, the
So much
clothing
that has
that's
to come into play,
necessary.
yeah.
The obituary would have to be compiled. The funeral home helps the family with the obituary. So there's a lot of information. Merchandise has to be selected: caskets, outer burial containers, urns if it's going to be a cremation, and there's a lot of information to cover.
Golly, that is amazing. And you really have to have that experience, have to be a certified professional to be able to properly and adequately serve that family during that time. Is that something that folks oftentimes get in a mortuary school, or do they apprentice, for instance, or they work oftentimes in a funeral home? How does someone become, is it just over time they're skilled and capable of answering and preparing and planning for a funeral?
Time certainly helps, experience helps, on-the-job training helps, and it varies from state to state what the requirements are. But in South Carolina, there is a 2-year apprenticeship program that you have to serve before you can become licensed.
Is that right? Everyone in the state?
That's correct.
Wow.
In order to become a licensed funeral director, you have to serve 2 years apprenticeship, and then there's some educational requirements, and they vary a little bit between the funeral director's license and the embalmer's license, but you can cover all of your educational requirements by attending, of course, Gupton Jones College of Funeral Service in Atlanta.
Right.
And once you serve your apprenticeship and then meet your educational requirements, there's national and state testing that's required, board testing that's required, that you have to take those tests, and then you can stand for your licensing.
Sounds like very serious stuff.
It is, and it's more time-consuming than people realize. Between your apprenticeship and your schooling requirements, now it's a minimum of 3.5 years in South Carolina.
Is that right?
That's right.
Wow. Is South Carolina different than most states? Is it more aggressive in the amount of time that has to be spent?
That's about average. There are even some states that require more school than we do.
Really?
But that's about average, to my knowledge, of the state requirements. That's kind of in line with what everybody else requires.
Just wondering about what would be the percentage of male to female down at Gupton Jones? Not to put you on the spot, and you may not know. Are there many women going into the funeral industry?
Changing rapidly. That's
Really?
Funny that you see that. Yes, even from when I was in school, which was 20 years ago, it was probably 70-30 men when I was in school,
Right.
and the class I just spoke to last week is reversed.
Is that? Oh, come on.
It certainly is.
70% women?
Yes.
30%? Oh, come on.
Yes,
Really?
it's amazing. Now, every class isn't quite that percentage,
Right,
but
right.
the classes that I'm seeing now are more than 50% female.
Now, why do you think that is? Do you have any idea about that? We got about 5 minutes, Charles, and I'm just thinking...
I don't know all the reasons. We talk about that. One thing is, I think the funeral industry has evolved, and funeral home owners have evolved. Right. Sadly, I think 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of owners maybe wouldn't hire women as readily as they will today. Right. Of course, there's a lot of lifting involved. There's a lot of physical part of the job that's involved that can be more difficult for smaller, petite ladies. But there is certainly a place for women in funeral service, and I think that's being seen by more and more people. And women are filling more and more of those positions, and they're seeing the opportunities that are available.
That's tremendous, Charles. We had a guest down a couple of weeks ago. We were filming a Grassy Granite. He lives in Charlotte, and he spends a lot of time regularly with a woman, Carolyn Williams, in Charlotte, who's with a Heritage Funeral Services or homes up there. It was fascinating hearing him talk about, just as a layman, what he's learned from her. Of course, she grew up in the business with her father, I believe, who owned a cemetery and funeral home there in Charlotte. But fascinating hearing him talk about just what he learned from her, and now he's begun to think more about his future or just the end of his life, possibly, just from spending time with her, and how caring she has been in helping him understand that.
So many people don't realize the different hats that we wear and the things that their funeral director will guide them through at that time of need. There's a lot of different things that people go through during a death, and there's just such a wide range of reasons that people call on us that so many people just don't think about and don't understand. I used to tell my golf buddies they wouldn't truly appreciate what I do until they need me, and then that's when they understand everything that we do. I have a very good friend that owns a funeral home in Holly Hill, South Carolina, which is a very, very small town.
Right, sure.
And I played in a golf tournament down there last year, and at the very last minute, he had to cancel. He was called to, he got busy at his funeral home. Right. He had to cancel the golf tournament and go to work. And I told so many of his friends that day, I said, you all just don't know how lucky you are that he is your local undertaker. Wow. Because he is a fine, fine person.
That's tremendous.
And that's part of the business too. The confinement and the unpredictable nature of when death occurs is just usually you almost never know when that's going to happen, and your funeral director is available 24 hours a day. We
had a guest on literally a couple of weeks ago, Rick Neal, who's a licensed funeral director in Baltimore. We were filming at Reflections there in Carolina Forest. It was on Monday the 11th of February, and it's fascinating as he's highlighting it. He and his wife's 10-year anniversary coming up on Valentine. He said it could be this Thursday. We're going out to dinner. He's not right now in a funeral home, but if he was, highlighting that the call could come and she'd end up getting back home and he'd get to the funeral home and would be out. And I'm sure you've experienced that, Alan, George, Steve, all the folks here. You've just had to, because that family needs you at that moment and not 2 hours from now.
Ask my wife. We brought in the new millennium at McMillan Small Funeral Home. We were at work at 12 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just the way it happened, and I was on call, and duty called, and we were at a New Year's Eve party to bring in the year 2000.
That's fascinating.
Didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, the Y2K thing, folks were freaking out, but y'all were...
We were at the funeral home.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's happened many times, so she'll tell you many stories about that.
Charles, for you, traveling the Carolinas, seeing great operators, your friend in Holly Hill, seeing folks here and in the PD, you must have some feelings of, do you miss it all, being actively involved in the industry of planning out folks' futures? Yes, I do.
There is a big side of me that, not to use cliches, but you are called to do this, and I think once you do this and it is who you become, it's not a job, it's a way of life, and there are certainly things about it that I miss.
Right.
I certainly do, with the day-to-day operation of the funeral home and helping people through those times.
There must be things you really love about Pierce Chemicals and being out and visiting all these funeral homes throughout the Carolinas.
I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of great people, get a lot of great ideas, watching how they run their business on a daily basis. Right. I have more flexibility. I was able to make this appointment with you today and keep it. A little more flexibility, a little more time off, and not on call as often. been able to travel. We have conventions throughout the state that I attend and also throughout the nation. I'm a member of the National Funeral Directors Association as well, and we have annual conventions that are in great places and resorts all over the country, and I'm able to do that. And of course, we work hard when we get there, but we still have some time off to have fun, and this year was Vegas, and next year's Orlando, and so we have good conventions.
That's wonderful. Charles, thanks so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time.
Oh,
thanks
thank
for being
you very
with us
much.
this morning.
I enjoyed being here.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Charles Miles of Pierce Chemical Company coming up next. Think about that slow progression from painting the picket fence to painting the garage to washing the cars to riding on the grave truck to planning for someone's funeral, to helping to plan that funeral. How about those 5 words, as long as it takes? As long as it takes, the answer to that simple question, how long does it take to plan a funeral? What a great answer. Mr. Buchanan chimed in at Gupton Jones. He chimed in as he sent Charles off to Dunbar. Charles later made that decision, as long as it takes. He made that commitment at an early age. He continues to make that commitment today. You can probably see him out down in Holly Hill visiting with an operator, up in throughout the Carolinas visiting with somebody, knowing that as long as it takes, he'll be there to get the job done. He's making that commitment every day. Funeral operators and owners are making that commitment every day. Learn more about the industry. Take the time, as long as it takes, is their commitment. Charles Miles, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah.